The LGBTQ lobby is coming for your children. That's the topic of today's Golden News. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. We're coming for your children. That was the quoted message of a video put out in honor of Pride Month, June, from the San Francisco Gay Men's Choir. An announcement: we're coming for your children. How does that make you feel as a parent? Before I get into the discussion about the LGBTQ agenda and how it is harming America's youth, I want to quickly mention that if you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the online platform for all your faith-based podcasts. Go there, check out Bold and Blunt, but check out the other faith-based podcasts there as well. You can also get Bold and Blunt at washingtontimes.com and wherever podcasts are offered. We're coming for your children. If you're a parent in America right now and you have an LGBTQ crowd calling out that message, crowing that message, singing that message, how does that make you feel? We'll convert your children. That's another message from this same San Francisco Gay Men's Choir. We'll convert your children happens bit by bit, quietly and subtly, and you will barely notice it. Family Policy Alliance, familypolicyalliance.com, picked up on this video and transcribed what the messages were from this gay men's organization. Here's another quote. Just like you're worried they'll change their group of friends so you won't approve of where they go at night, and you'll be disgusted when they start finding things online that you kept far from their sight. That's the message to parents. Just like you're worried, just like you, parents of America, have been worried, the LGBTQ agenda lobbyist will change your child's group of friends. What kind of message is that to send? It released this video on July 1st, talking about the conversion of children, the vow to convert children of America. And very wickedly, very evilly, the message came by way of this sort of sing-songy video. Take a listen to some of this video.
Celebrate Pride on the progress we've made over these past years. There's still work to be done. So to those of you out there who are still working against equal rights, we have a message for you. You think we're sinful? You fight against our rights. You say we all lead lives you can't respect. But you're just frightened. You think that we'll corrupt your kids if our agenda goes unchecked. Funny, just this once, you're correct. We'll convert your children. Happens bit by bit, quietly and subtly, and you will barely notice it.
That is so evil. I mean, this guy's singing this with a smile on his face, and this video was made a year ago. This video was made in June or July of 2021, but when the group received backlash, they pointed out that this was satirical in nature. But is it really? Because actually, this is just speaking out loud the parts that aren't supposed to be spoken out loud by the LGBTQ crowd. The LGBTQ crowd insists that their push to normalize the LGBTQ agenda is all about equal rights. It's all about fighting discrimination. It's all about fighting the attacks that the LGBTQ crowd has suffered unfairly in many instances over the years, over the decades, throughout history. It's true. You shouldn't beat up somebody simply because they're gay. You shouldn't take physical action against somebody simply because they have a sexual lifestyle choice that disagrees with your own values. Live and let live comes in play here. But at the same time, the LGBTQ crowd has been extremely deceptive about their agenda over the last few years, that it's not so much about fighting discrimination and demanding equal treatment in culture and society. It's really about radicalizing the next generation to embrace something that most in America to this day still see as an aberration of norms. And once again, if this is something that you choose for your lifestyle, so be it. That's your American right. We all have freedoms here. But the right to choose for your own lifestyle does not give you the right to force a lifestyle on others. And more than that, it does not give you the right to corrupt the younger generations, the younger innocent minds in America. And this is what's taking place with the LGBTQ agenda and crowd and lobby today. They're all about exactly what this messaging says. They're all about coming for your children, will convert your children, happens bit by bit, quietly and subtly, and you will barely notice it. That's a stark warning to parents around the nation. And you can see how the tendency of Americans to favor tolerance for dissenting views and dissenting opinions has sort of opened the floodgates for the LGBTQ agenda to steamroll across America and ratchet up their demands. What used to be just quiet tolerance for those who lived different lifestyles has now turned into those of different lifestyles demanding loudly the ability to control even how other people outside their lifestyle choices speak to them. Now we have in America situations where teachers are being forced to call boys in their classrooms, male students, by female pronouns simply because these male students say that they are actually female, or they identify as female, or they self-identify as female. And then even going beyond that, we have students in classrooms forcing their teachers, or trying to force their teachers, or taking their schools to court to force their teachers to call them genderless pronouns, just made up pronouns. I suspect most of these students pushing for these types of agendas are doing so because A, they've either been fueled on by adults affiliated with the LGBTQ lobby who want to push the button so as to bring the ball farther down the field and shift the mindset and culture of America. So they're using these children as ways to shift the mindset and culture of America. Or B, these kids just want to have fun. They're in school. They know that now they can get away with making their teachers call them, in some instances, pronouns that are different from their biological birth identifiers. And so, for fun, just to push the button, just to start trouble, because kids do that. Kids will be kids. They're forcing schools. They are challenging schools. They are taking this case to court and so forth. It's gotten out of hand, and we've got the lunatics running the asylum right now. And it's not just annoying. It's not just newsworthy. It's become perilous for our nation's moral compass. We are being conditioned to believe that the abnormal is the normal. And if we don't see it that way, that at the very least, we're to shut up and sit down and pretend to buy into the lies and deceptions. We're to pretend like an Alice in Wonderland scene, as if the insane is actually sane. And where does that lead our nation in the coming generations? Well, it's even worse when issues like this go to court. and you have judges who are just as lunatic fringe as some in the LGBTQ lobby and rule in favor of the insanity. And so then it gets dragged out in appeals and additional court hearings. And that's where the real damage is done, when the court rubber stamps the lunatic fringe. There's a case right now in Alabama that is bringing forward an LGBTQ issue, but as a free speech matter. It's a fight, really, in the end, over First Amendment freedom of speech. And, even more interestingly, it involves the Department of Justice, Joe Biden's particular weapon of choice these days. And I have with me a guest today. She is the president of the Eagle Forum in Washington, D.C., and she has been watching the Eagle Forum chapter in Alabama suffer through this court challenge right now, and she's here to explain what's going on. Kris Ullman, president of Eagle Forum, I want to thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
I'm glad to be with you today.
So let's get right to what's going on with this Department of Justice targeting the Alabama chapter of the Eagle Forum. What is going on?
Well, let's go back to a few months ago, actually a few years ago, when the Alabama Eagle Forum members petitioned their government to address a problem they saw, which was the treatment of transgender youth, kids with gender dysphoria, and the fact that they were being given cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers, which are very dangerous. So they petitioned the Alabama legislature to do something about it. And there were 3 years of consideration by the legislature, and they passed a bill that, among other things, blocks cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers from minors in the state of Alabama. Signed into law by the governor in May, and immediately activists on the other side filed suit. That's legal. That's their right to do that. They disagree with the law. The DOJ joined the suit as an intervener party. Again, that's legal. That's fine. We disagree, but they have the right to do that. But then what the DOJ did was they subpoenaed Eagle Forum of Alabama for 5 years of their records on anything having to do with kids with gender dysphoria. Eagle Forum of Alabama is not a party to this lawsuit. They are merely a 501c4 group that was created to lobby the government to pass laws that they agreed with, which is what they did. But DOJ has come after them with an 11-point subpoena demanding all their records having to do with this legislation. In fact, 2 years prior to when they began working on this issue. So we see that as a violation of free speech, free assembly, and the right to petition your government.
Now, what reason does DOJ give for wanting 5 years of Alabama's Eagle Forum records, especially when you point out a couple of those years were before this legislation was even part of the discussions?
Well, they claim that the legislative intent is relevant to this case, but the Supreme Court, as recently as the Dobbs decision, has stated that legislative intent is not important. If they really want to know the legislative intent, they should ask the lawmakers, not an outside group that has been very clear on why we think that these specific medical treatments are dangerous to young people. The DOJ has given no real legitimate reason for why they want these documents, but they want all communications between Eagle Forum of Alabama and any employee of the state legislature, the governor's office, the lieutenant governor's office, the AG's office. They want any communications between Eagle Forum of Alabama and any other non-governmental organization or lobbyist, any records of meetings concerning this bill or any predecessor bills, any polling or public opinion data. I mean, it is outrageously in-depth, intrusive, and really irrelevant to the case at hand, which is whether or not the law as written violates the equal protection rights of children with gender dysphoria.
I'm a little bit confused as to why the DOJ would go the route that they've chosen because, as you say, if they truly want to know the legislative intent, the avenue to pursue would be to do, say, FOIA requests, or as the DOJ, they wouldn't have to do all that, but to look at the legislature and start there and then just get the, emails or correspondences between the legislative staffers and the legislators and outside groups. That way, that all those documents would be under public records. But going after you is kind of going the opposite direction.
It is, especially because Eagle Forum of Alabama is not a party to this lawsuit at all.
Right.
And as far as we can tell, this has never happened before. Now, let me say, non-parties have been subpoenaed to lawsuits before, but never in this way. Never a citizen lobby group has been subpoenaed by the DOJ. Think about it this way. The state, say a state sued the Trump administration for the Remain in Mexico policy. Did they ever go after an outside group that had lobbied for repealing Remain in Mexico?
Right.
No. How do we know that? Well, I don't actually know, but I do know that the New York Times would have had that on the headline. CNN would have been holding fundraisers.
Right.
I mean, we know this hasn't happened from the right to the left because we would have heard about it if it happened. So we're arguing this is an unprecedented move. And the real purpose, because we can't find any other, must be to silence citizen activists that dare to stand up and say, you know what, there ought to be a law. There ought to be a law protecting these vulnerable children. And that all that they did was stand up and say there ought to be a law. And we feel strongly about this, but the legislature crafted it, passed it, held hearings, the governor signed it. Everything was done completely in a legal manner, and yet our speech is being chilled by this invasive subpoena.
It's very interesting as well because, as you point out, and you can't harp on this point enough, that you're not even involved. It's just that it happens to be a topic that you guys are concerned about. But second off, it's not as if it's a surprise, your stance anyhow. It's like going back to your example about Trump and the border. It would be almost as if Center for Immigration Studies were targeted by the DOJ for having an opinion about limiting immigration in America. CIS stands for that. And similarly, it's not as if Eagle Forum is a surprise on standing on the side of family values or against puberty blockers. So the only conclusion is what you just yourself said, that it has to be some sort of political target or witch hunt that they are doing against Eagle Forum.
Eagle Forum of Alabama is made up of about 3,500 members. Only one is paid. The rest are all volunteers. Eagle Forum is primarily a volunteer organization.
Jeez.
They are trying to chill our free speech. Even if we rolled over and said, yes, we'll turn over everything, it would take months to get all this information together. And on the Eagle Forum of Alabama webpage, they lay out why they supported this law. On our eagleforum.org webpage, we are in support of laws like this. We make, as you said, we are not trying to hide our opinion on this issue, why we think these drugs are dangerous, why we think it's the wrong avenue, and why we want to protect children. And so the only conclusion one can come to is that this is political harassment. And we've seen support. We have 53 individuals and conservative groups who have written an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief on our behalf. And we really would like some people on the left to come out and say, you know what? It is a free speech issue. We want to stand up for the right of every organization to speak out, whether you're on the right or the left. And so I feel that this is an issue that should have bipartisan support because I want all groups that have opinions to be able to weigh in and have their right to free speech. That's how we sort things out in our country, by talking about them. not by chilling that very speech that's so important.
Yeah, I think you are 100% correct that you are being targeted. The Alabama chapter of Eagle Forum is being targeted, and it's exactly what you just said, to stifle and censor and chill speech, because these are people who just volunteer. You have one paid employee, 34.99 employees who volunteer for that. And so most of them don't even probably understand the political firestorm that they're setting themselves up to by volunteering for Eagle Forum. And now they have the DOJ breathing down their necks.
Exactly. And I've heard from other state leaders that we have across the country who are considering this kind of legislation. And they say to me, well, what can I do to avoid a subpoena? Well, there's nothing you can do. You're a registered 501c4, which is an organization that is created to lobby, to petition the government. Donations to these organizations are not tax deductible because of the lobbying aspect of the organization, and yet they're being subpoenaed for all their records going back 2 years before they even began discussing the issue. What could possibly be the reason? There just isn't one, other than they feel that we may have had an impact on the drafting of the legislation, which is like, yeah, you're right. We did approach lawmakers and say, hey, there ought to be a law. But if you remember Schoolhouse Rock, that little bill says, I was an idea until someone went to their elected representative and said, there ought to be a law, and then they drafted it and passed it, and that's how you get laws in this country. So it's completely legal. It is what we were created to do, and suddenly we're being punished and having all our, not only our external communications, but they'd like our internal communications as well.
Yeah, there's a reason they're going after the smallest voices, because as you pointed out, this was duly passed. This was legislatively passed and signed into law. And it's astonishing that the DOJ would so blatantly target small voices in Alabama who just stand for an issue that's not even secretive, that the organization that they volunteer for, it's not even a secret. So just tell listeners briefly what the bill is about, actually, and why you oppose puberty blockers.
The bill does three things. Actually four. It prevents doctors from administering puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones to kids under 19. It also bans the genital mutilation through surgery of kids under 19, and it requires schools to alert parents of anything that if they're treating their kid for gender dysphoria in the school. So it's a parent's right to know. It stops the surgeries. The only issue that when they sued to block the law, they're blocking only the cross-sex hormones and the puberty blockers. And the reason that this is so dangerous is because once you start kids down the road with these drugs, they claim they're temporary, but they have permanent effects. Once you administer these to prepubescent or even kids who are beginning to go through puberty, there really is no going back. You are permanently altering their bodies through these hormones. And we just believe that kids at these young, tender ages, they need the opportunity to grow up and mature. We know that the adolescent brain doesn't mature until, they say, in the early 20s. So these minor kids need to be protected until they're mature enough to make a decision about their future. And we just feel that, 12, 13, 14-year-olds, all the way up to 18, they should have the chance to grow up. And maybe with treatment, they will realize they are happy in their biological gender. But we at least want to give them that opportunity. And these drugs stop that opportunity. They're permanently damaging these young people.
Yeah, it's just common sense legislation, common sense law right now. So just to wrap up, what are the next steps? Where does the fight against DOJ lead next?
Well, we filed a motion to quash the subpoena, which means we want the court to invalidate it. the DOJ filed a response. We filed a response to their response, and there will be a hearing on October 14th in Alabama. The judge will hear the issue of whether or not we are required to turn over all this invasive information.
And
so people can say a prayer for us that the judge sees through this and that finds in our favor after the October 14th hearing.
And what's your sense, Kris, on how that may go October 14th?
Our attorneys have told us it's not a slam dunk, although they believe the law is on our side, especially if you look at the most recent Dobbs decision where they really did talk about the legislative intent. But even if they want the legislative intent, like you mentioned, there are other ways they can go about getting it. They can go to the legislators themselves who actually voted on it and ask them, what was this anti-trans bigotry that made you pass this law, or is there a legitimate government reason to protect young people from these life-altering drugs? And so we're just hoping that the judge is a common sense judge and says, you know what, no, the First Amendment rights here override any need to violate the First Amendment rights of this organization.
Wow. I would love to hear the outcome of this October 14th case. Are you going to be putting it on Eagle Forum's website?
Yes. In fact, we have the subpoena at eagleforum.org, and we have our filings in the case. We also have a number of press articles in support and the friend of the court brief that the 53 organizations and individuals have signed. And that includes 6 state lawmakers and 6 U.S. congressmen from Alabama. So there's 12 lawmakers that have weighed in and said to DOJ, this is wrong. This is a violation. So go to eagleforum.org. You can help us out. You can make a donation. Just go there and read the material. The primary source documents are all there for everyone to read.
Big hearing. All right. Thank you, Kris Ullman, president of Eagle Forum. Thank you.
I hope to talk to you after the hearing.
Yes. So that hearing's coming up. Say your prayers for Eagle Forum. Say your prayers for sanity, a return to sanity in this great United States of America, because we are falling on morally bankrupt times. And if we don't put a stop to this lunacy soon, we won't have a nation. We won't have a free nation left. I want to thank you for listening. I want to remind you, if you like Bold and Blunt, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the online platform for faith-based podcasts. You can also get Bold and Blunt by going to washingtontimes.com, finding my name, my hyperlinked name, clicking on it, and signing up for my 3 times a week newsletter that comes out at the Washington Times, containing all my commentaries that I write all week long, as well as my twice weekly Bold and Blunt podcast. Sign up, get my commentaries and podcasts delivered right to your email box, or one more quick note, you can get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are offered. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. Tune in next time. And don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.